Old West outlaws who were better than you think. The Marlow Brothers were branded as outlaws, murderers, and dangerous criminals by the law in Texas and Indian Territory during the 1880s. Their faces were on wanted posters across Texas. Lawmen hunted them. Newspapers called them killers who need to be brought to justice. Here's the problem. They didn't actually do anything wrong. It's 1888 and 4 of the 5 Marlow brothers, George, Charles, Alfred, Llewellyn, were arrested in Graham, Texas on suspicion of horse theft. They were innocent, but that didn't matter because evidently evidence was more of a suggestion back then. While they sat in jail waiting for trial, a mob decided to take justice into their own hands because why wait for boring things like due process when you can just commit murder instead? On January 17, 1889, the brothers were shackled together, placed in a wagon, and led into what was supposed to be a routine transfer between jails. Except it wasn't routine at all. A deputy and a group of vigilantes had set up an ambush because it seems due process was for suckers. The brothers, still chained together, managed to fight back in what became one of the most insane gunfights in Old West history. George and Charles, despite being shackled, somehow managed to wrestle guns away from their attackers in the chaos. Alfred and Llewellyn, still chained up, fought with whatever they could. The battle lasted hours. When the smoke cleared, 2 of the brothers, Alfred and Llewellyn, were dead. But George and Charles survived and killed several of their attackers in self-defense. Here's where it gets absolutely horrific. George and Charles were still shackled to their dead brothers. They couldn't escape while chained together, so they did what they had to do. They grabbed the sharpest rocks they could find and literally hacked off their dead brothers' feet to escape the chains. Yeah, let that one marinate in your brain for a second. Imagine having to remove your dead brother's feet because that's literally the only way not to die. Not exactly a Hallmark movie moment. Then they walked 19 miles through the wilderness before finally finding someone to help them. 19 miles, while probably experiencing the worst PTSD imaginable. The authorities charged them with murder for defending themselves against a lynch mob. So to recap, innocent guys get arrested, survive a murder attempt, have to mutilate their dead brothers to escape, walk nearly 20 miles traumatized as hell, and then get charged with murder. Makes perfect sense. But the nightmare wasn't over for the Marlow family because apparently God was taking a sick day. There was a 5th brother, Boon Marlow, who hadn't been with them that day. Authorities put a bounty on Boon's head anyway, because why not? We're already ruining this family, might as well go for a full set. Bounty hunters tracked Boon to a hideout near a river. The bounty hunters knew they couldn't take Boon in a straight fight, so they came up with a plan that was equal parts clever and absolutely diabolical. They convinced Boone's girlfriend to deliver him a poison pie. "Boone, I made you a pie!" "Thanks, hon. How's things in town?" "The menfolk are all up in a tizzy about something. Have some pie." Yummy. Tastes like almonds and regret." "Sorry. Bounty money." So out of 5 brothers, only 2 survived. Eventually, George and Charles were acquitted because even a frontier jury could see how insane this was. They'd been innocent from the start. After the trial, Charles and George said screw Texas and escaped to Ouray, Colorado, where they homesteaded some land. They even became deputies for a period of time. Talk about a redemption arc worthy of Netflix. And honestly, who could blame them for leaving Texas? Their story became so legendary that a town in Oklahoma was named after them, Marlow, Oklahoma. There's even a room dedicated to the Marlow brothers in the Ouray Museum, and in 1965, their story became a John Wayne movie called The Sons of Katie Elder. So they went from wanted criminals to Hollywood legends. Not bad for guys who were literally just trying not to die. The Marlow brothers weren't outlaws. They were innocent men who refused to die quietly and had to do some absolutely horrific things to survive. That's not criminal. That's legendary and traumatizing. Yeah, mostly traumatizing. Gregorio Cortez became one of the most wanted men in Texas in 1901. The manhunt involved hundreds of lawmen, bloodhounds, and a 10-day chase across the state that probably cost more money than just leaving the guy alone. Newspapers called him a cop-killing outlaw and a dangerous criminal who needed to be brought to justice immediately. Fake news. The reality? Cortez shot a sheriff in self-defense after a complete language mix-up that spiraled into a nightmare. Basically, someone should have sprung for a better translator. On June 12, 1901, Sheriff W.T. Morse showed up at Cortez's farm looking for a horse thief. The problem was, Morse didn't speak Spanish, and Cortez barely spoke English. The translator, and I'm using that word very loosely here, completely botched the conversation. Morse asked about a horse. Cortez tried to explain he traded a mare, not a horse, which in Spanish are two different words, but the translator was evidently just making things up. Ask him about the horse. He says your mustache looks stupid. That's it! Cortez shot Morris in self-defense because of a catastrophically incompetent translator. Then Cortez ran because he knew exactly what would happen to Mexicans accused of killing white lawmen in Texas in 1901. Spoiler alert, it rhymed with pinching and it wasn't a fair trial. What followed was absolutely legendary. Cortez evaded hundreds of pursuers for 10 days, traveling over 400 miles on foot and horseback. He outsmarted posses, doubled back on his own trail like he was in a Looney Tunes cartoon, and became a folk hero to Mexican Americans, who saw him as a man wrongly accused fighting against an unjust system. Which, to be fair, he was. When he finally surrendered, probably exhausted from playing the world's longest game of tag, Cortez went through multiple trials. He was eventually convicted of killing another lawman during the chase and sentenced to life in prison. But even then, the case was so controversial that thousands of people petitioned for his release because apparently some people could recognize injustice when they saw it. Gregorio Cortez wasn't a criminal. He was a man who refused to be murdered over a translation error. The fact that he's remembered as an outlaw instead of a victim tells you everything about whose story gets told. Also, maybe invest in better translators, Texas. Just a thought. Black Bart robbed 28 Wells Fargo stagecoaches between 1875 and 1883, making him one of the most prolific bandits in California history. His wanted posters offered massive rewards. He became a legend of the Old West outlaw era. Law enforcement wanted him dead or alive, preferably dead because paperwork is annoying. But here's the twist that'll blow your mind. Black Bart was the most polite, non-violent robber you've ever heard of. He was basically the Mr. Rogers of stagecoach robbery. His real name was Charles Bowles, and he had rules, strict ones. He never fired a shot during any of his robberies, not once. He always apologized to his victims and told them he didn't want to hurt anyone like he was inconveniencing them at a grocery store checkout line. He only robbed the Wells Fargo strongbox, never took personal items from passengers. Some victims even said he was charming and polite. Oh, and he left poetry at the crime scenes because robbing stagecoaches wasn't artistic enough for him. After several robberies, Bart started leaving handwritten poems signed Black Bart, the PO8. The poems mocked Wells Fargo and turned him into a folk hero. One of his most famous went, "Roses are red, violets are blue. You suck, give me your money." Okay, that's not true, but his real poems weren't really much better. One ended with, "I've labored long and hard for bread, for honor and for riches. But on my corns too long you've tread, you fine-haired sons of bitches." Shakespeare? No. Iconic? Absolutely. Wells Fargo was furious, but also kind of impressed because how do you even stay mad at a guy who rhymes his crimes? Bart was finally caught in 1883 after dropping a handkerchief at a crime scene. Seriously, that's how they got him. Not some elaborate detective work. He literally dropped his handkerchief, the most gentlemanly way to get caught. The handkerchief had a laundry mark that led detectives to a San Francisco laundry, which led them to Charles Bowles, a well-dressed gentleman living a quiet double life in the city. He served 4 years in San Quentin, was released in 1888, and completely disappeared. He ghosted harder than your Tinder matches. Some say he kept robbing, but nothing was ever proven. Wells Fargo even gave him a small stipend, possibly to keep him from robbing again, or maybe because they respected the hustle. Honestly, the man had style. Black Bart was a thief, sure, but he was also a poet who never hurt anyone and turned stagecoach robbery into performance art. As far as outlaws go, you could do a lot worse. At least he had manners. Pearl Hart was one of the last stagecoach robbers in American history, and one of the very few female outlaws in the Old West. In 1889, she held up a stagecoach in Arizona with her partner, Joe Boot, making her instantly famous. Newspapers ate it up because a woman robbing a stagecoach? Scandalous, outrageous, definitely worth selling papers over. But Pearl didn't rob the stagecoach for fun, greed, or because she wanted to be an outlaw. She did it because her mother was dying and she needed money to get home. So basically the worst episode of Extreme Makeover Home Edition ever. Pearl had been working as a cook in a mining camp, barely scraping by on wages that probably wouldn't buy you a decent sandwich today. When she got word that her mother was gravely ill back in Ohio, she had no money for a train ticket. So she did what any desperate daughter would do. She grabbed a gun and robbed a stagecoach. Desperate times, desperate measures, terrible career choices. She and Joe Boot robbed a stagecoach near Globe, Arizona, taking about $450, which is like $15,000 today, so decent haul. And the passengers' guns for good measure. Pearl apologized to the passengers and explained she needed the money for her sick mother. Some accounts say she even gave a few dollars back to one passenger who seemed particularly broke, which is both sweet and defeats the entire purpose of robbery. They were caught within days because, and this is a peak outlaw incompetence, they got lost in the desert and wandered in circles until a posse found them. Imagine robbing a stagecoach successfully and then getting caught because you don't know which way is north. GPS would have saved her entire criminal career. Here's where it gets interesting and proves that juries are unpredictable. At trial, the jury was so sympathetic to Pearl's story about her dying mother that they initially acquitted her. The judge was absolutely furious, declared a mistrial faster than you could say judicial misconduct, and ordered a new trial because apparently letting a desperate daughter go free was too radical. The second jury convicted her, but public opinion was firmly on her side. Pearl became an overnight celebrity. She went viral before going viral was a thing. Newspapers across the country covered her story like she was a reality TV star. People sent her gifts in jail. She was eventually released early due to public pressure and went on to do interviews and tell her story, probably making more money from that than the actual robbery. Was Pearl Hart a criminal? Technically, yes. But she was also a desperate daughter trying to see her dying mother one last time, which is about as sympathetic as crime gets. Sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing. Also, invest in a compass next time. Sam Bass was a train and bank robber who terrorized Texas in the 1870s. He and his gang stole thousands of dollars, evaded lawmen for years, and became one of the most wanted men in the state. He was a criminal by every definition of the word. Wanted posters, shootouts, the whole 9 yards. But here's the thing. Sam Bass was also kind of a hero to regular people. He was the original Robin Hood, Texas edition. Basically, the Robin Hood of Texas, except with more guns and better hat choices. Bass had a strict code that he actually followed, unlike most outlaws who just made up rules as they went. He only robbed banks and trains, never regular folks. In fact, he often gave money to poor families and farmers he met on the road like some kind of outlaw Santa Claus. He became a folk hero in Texas because he was robbing from wealthy corporations and railroad companies that most people hated anyway. When your enemy is a faceless corporation, suddenly the guy robbing them doesn't seem so bad. More importantly, Sam Bass never killed anyone during his robberies. Not once. Not a single person. Even when things went sideways and shootouts erupted, which happened because robbing places tends to make people upset, Bass and his gang always fired to escape, not to kill. That was almost unheard of for outlaws at the time. Most bandits had body counts higher than their IQs. Local communities protected him like he was a beloved neighborhood cat. When lawmen came asking about Bass, people suddenly couldn't remember seeing him. Farmers would hide him in their barns. Small towns would look the other way when his gang rode through town, like Sam who? Never heard of him. Good luck with your manhunt, though. Bass's downfall came in 1878 when one of his own gang members, Jim Murphy, betrayed him to the Texas Rangers. Murphy set up an ambush in Round Rock, Texas, because I guess loyalty meant nothing when money was involved. During the shootout, Bass was mortally wounded. He died 2 days later on his 27th birthday, which is both tragic and terrible timing. Even in death, people loved Sam Bass. Songs were written about him like he was some kind of Old West rock star. His grave became a tourist attraction. He was remembered not as a vicious criminal, but as a good man who happened to rob trains because honestly, have you seen train ticket prices? Was Sam Bass a criminal? Absolutely. No debate there. But he was a criminal with principles, and in the lawless chaos of the Old West, that counted for something. When banks and railroads were exploiting regular people left and right, a bandit who stole from the rich and never killed anyone seemed downright noble by comparison. At least he had standards. Hey, cowboy or cowgirl, if you enjoyed this, hit subscribe and drop a comment with which outlaw surprised you the most.